How communists use youth in order to advance their communist principles. Subtitle this, How Democrats Use Youth to Advance Their Socialist/Communist Principles. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt, and I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. And before I get into that topic, I want to give a quick reminder that if you like Bold and Blunt and would like to subscribe to Bold and Blunt, do so, please, by going to WashingtonTimes.com, finding either the newsletter section or my hyperlinked name and clicking on it, and you can sign up for my 3 times a week newsletter that comes out at the Washington Times Monday, Wednesday, and Friday that contains all my commentaries along with my twice weekly Tuesday and Thursday Bold and Blunt podcasts. Or you can also go to edify.app and find Bold and Blunt there. That is the online platform for faith-based podcasts. And here's one other way you can find Bold and Blunt. Anywhere podcasts are offered. Apple, Spotify, Audible, so forth and so on. I really appreciate my regular listeners. And if you like Bold and Blunt, I really would appreciate you subscribing. So, communists, how they steal youth, how they steal the youth to exploit for their own evil communist purposes. This is especially important to realize in America because the Democrat Party, if you look at the platform of the Democrat Party of today and compare it to the platforms of, say, the Socialist Party or Communist Party platforms, and then rope in progressive platforms or Democratic progressive platforms or democratic socialist platforms, they are essentially all the same. They are just advancing the same principles at different speeds. And they also use maybe a little bit different rhetoric to advance the same collectivist ideas. The only difference in parties really in America are those that bring forth Republican or conservative principles. The Constitution Party, the Republican Party, they differ very much from the Democrat Party. And the Democrat Party is very much in line with socialist and communist principles. Don't take my word for it. Look it up yourself. It's there online to see. You can go to the DNC and read what they're all about, and then go to communist parties, both in America and outside of America, and socialist parties in America and outside of America, and see. Very much the same platforms, very much the same ideals. That's why it's important to understand how communists are actively looking to recruit youth in America, because this is a very big danger in America today. In the late 1970s, there was this new organization formed. It was called the Revolutionary Communist Youth Brigade. It was initially called the Attica Brigade, and then it went through another name change. It was then called the Revolutionary Student Brigade. But the general premise never changed. The general mission was to recruit youth into advocating a communist ideology in America. And this comes from Marxist.org, online historical reference. At its founding convention, 650 youth from around the country attended. And let me just read from Marxist.org, what they title in this subchapter, The Role of Youth. In other words, the role of youth in advancing communism. The importance of this organization, meaning this youthful communist organization, is clearly based on the important role youth have to play in making revolution. The millions of youth in this country, talking about America here, both working class youth and students, form a powerful reserve for the proletariat. It is an army of millions, the great majority of whom are sons and daughters of the working class. So communists actively look at youth as tools to advance communist agenda in America. back to Marxist.org. But it is not just numbers and potential strength, or even the fact that most youth will one day enter the ranks of the working class that makes this strata such an important one for the working class. There is also the fact that, as Mao says in Orientation of the Youth Movement, that youth can, in a certain sense, play a vanguard role. Youth can be a quote-unquote shock force, often being the first to take up revolutionary ideas and the struggle for revolution. This constitutes one of the most valuable contributions youth can make. And why the party, the Communist Party, see this as key. Along with this potential for youth to act as a vanguard in a way, is the potential for large numbers of youth to be won to the stand of the working class and join the ranks of the Communist Party. It sounds like something Barack Obama would have studied and put forth in America, right? It's capturing the energy of the youth to exploit for a very evil anti-America agenda. Yes, I do think that Barack Obama, the political activist, would read something like this and has read something like this, and a light bulb went off in his head where he said, hey, I can do that. Because remember, it was Barack Obama who chided from the national stage, who scolded from the White House platform that students, that children ought to tell their parents that health care is a right, ought to tell their parents how life ought to be, ought to basically school their parents in the new way of America's brave new world. Barack Obama was always targeting the youth to tell the silly parents, the silly adults in American society who dared believe in those age-old concepts of constitutional individual liberties. Barack Obama was always trying to sick the youth on their parents and create divide and discord within families. Barack Obama was always trying to elevate the youth and drum up how the youth, the Greta Thunbergs of the world, know better than those silly adults in the room, or the David Hogues of the world know much better than those silly Second Amendment supporters of the world, of the country. Barack Obama was very clever at using youth. And this is the way of the communists. This is how communists grab hold of the hearts and minds of the younger generation and drum up discord and envy, and then use that envy and malice to ignite some sort of revolution in the streets. Can you say Black Lives Matter, Antifa, the same types of people that the Barack Obama administration would invite into the White House to consult, to have secret, quiet conversations beyond the watchdog of the press? This is how communists work, right? They create divide and discord among those who have the most physical ability to go out in the streets and throw Molotov cocktails at police cruisers and lift heavy boulders and throw them through storefront windows to express, as the Democrats put it, their First Amendment protests. So the dangers of communism in America are real. And let me give you my take on how socialist / communist / collectivist agenda has seeped into America's youth just in the last couple of years of the coronavirus. Look at what's taking place in our college campuses right now. If you have a child going to college, chances are your college enacted sometime in the last couple of years, to varying degrees of strictness, coronavirus restrictions on individual liberties, all for the safety and health of supposedly your own child. If you go to college campuses now, many college campuses, as conditions of allowing children, students, to return to campus, forced these students, these young adults, to download apps to their smartphones, to their cell phones, that allowed the administration at their college campuses to track their movements. They were done under guise of health safety, called contact tracing apps, supposedly by carrying their phones with these apps on them. Students would be alerted when they came within a set determined number of feet from somebody who was tested positive for the coronavirus, and their phone would ping. So then that student would then be alerted to possibly go get tested, him or herself, to find out if he or she then tested positive for the coronavirus. And if he or she did, then that student was forced to quarantine. And the students, as conditions of returning to campus and engaging in campus activities that were limited in scope, that were limited to, say, 10 people in a gathering, not 9, not 11, but 10, right? Had to sign declarations, had to sign promises to their to their administrators, saying that they would not gather in groups greater than the determined amount, and that if they saw somebody gather in groups that were greater in size than the allowed amount, they would tattle. They would tattle. And those found guilty of gathering in groups greater than, say, 10 could be booted from campus, could be booted from school permanently. And guess what? They wouldn't see their money returned. They would lose their tuition, their fees, their housing dollars. The college would just keep them. So colleges around America have been turned into these little training grounds for big government, to be allowed to dictate liberties to students. And what do you think these students are learning? They're learning, A, that government has the right to tell them what to do, and they're not allowed to critically think for their own selves. And B, that government has the right to punish them with or without any type of due process. And government can punish them in ways that will change the entire direction of their lives. If they were on a fast course to success, say in business school or art school, and they dared to buck the mandate to wear a face mask as they walked about campus by themselves with no other individual in sight outside, and they got booted from school for it, they got expelled, and they lost all their money, well, that certainly changes the direction of their lives, right? Suddenly, that fast track to success has come to a grinding halt. And who knows? Who knows what they have to spend their next year or 2 years or 5 years doing? Their plans have been interrupted by government mandate. And usually by government mandate, that doesn't have to go through the normal due process that our Constitution supposedly guarantees. That doesn't even get into the LGBTQ movement and how that has completely reshaped opportunities for, say, female athletes to pursue scholarships, to pursue professional sports as a way of life. This is all part of socialist/communist agendas to train the next generation, first to fear things that shouldn't be fearful. How many young people do you see nowadays walking around with face masks voluntarily? How many young people do you see nowadays driving down the street in cars with nobody else inside, wearing face masks? What message are they being sent? To fear even the simple act of breathing, for crying out loud. But they're also being conditioned to believe that authority is not allowed to be questioned. Authority must be obeyed, blindly obeyed, without critically thinking for oneself, without daring to resist that authority, without daring to raise the idea of, hey, I'm an American citizen, I have rights that come from God, and government is supposed to be there to preserve and protect those God-given rights, not take them and give to those that government deems worthy. So this is how communists work. This is how socialists work. This is how evil collectivists work. They go after the youth, they capture the youth, and they do that by drumming up angry feelings or fearful feelings that can easily be exploited. Or, as Marxist.org puts it, youth's tremendous anger and frustration, though at present unfocused and often misdirected, provides a basis for their rebelliousness to be channeled into the fight against the capitalist class. There is plenty of raw material for building struggle around the conditions of youth. In their own words, communists, socialists, evil collectivists target the youth. So what's the state of America's youth right now? How's America faring with its youth? Under the last couple of years of the coronavirus, too many youth were subjected to overreaching government entities that one has to wonder, has it shifted the mindset of America's youth permanently? Or is this just a blip in America's history? Is this just a blip in a loss of liberties that all of America suffered for a short time? And soon enough, America's youth will wake up to the overreach of government and demand a return to individual liberty times. I hope it's that. It's door number 2, a return to liberty. But I have a guest today who has some interesting insights on how you think, because his primary job at PragerU is to visit with youth at college campuses around the nation and ask them interesting questions like, why do you think socialism is good for America? His name is Will Witt. He's a national best-selling author. He is a speaker around the world. He's a frequent media pundit and guest on Fox News, Blaze Media, and so forth. And I'm happy to say he's a repeat guest on Bold and Blunt. Will, thank you so much for being here on Bold and Blunt again. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, glad to be here.
So let's talk about a couple of things that you've had going on in the last few months. Since we last spoke, the Defeat the Mandates, how has that campaign gone?
The Defeat the Mandates was one of the most actual successful things that I've had the pleasure of being a part of, because the great thing about that it wasn't a Republican event, it wasn't necessarily just a conservative event. As I've been saying in my speeches at these rallies and at many of the rallies that I do, it's that this is a revolution of normal people. And so many normal people are now rising up and saying, listen, we didn't vote for Trump, or we weren't political before, but they see their rights and their freedoms being taken away, and they say, look, we have to come and do something. And so that's what we were really tapping into with those Defeat the Mandates rally. It wasn't partisan, it wasn't, pick a side. It was, hey, we all want our freedoms, we all understand what the Constitution represents, let's get that back no matter what your political party is.
You know, what's really effective about the age group that you target is these are the very people who had some very significant moments in their lives disrupted or outright stolen. Graduating high school came around right at the time the coronavirus hit, going on to freshman year, sophomore year in college. So how much do you think that has played into the effectiveness you've been able to see with Defeat the Mandates?
Well, it's tough to say. I would say the age demographics about 50-50 of younger and older people. And so it's hard to say whether or not that it's a lot of young people who are upset about the things that have been taken away from them. But I will say that the young people who did show up to these kind of rallies, who do show up to these kind of events, are the ones who are upset exactly what you're talking about. But I think that the divide in young people is even worse than old people, where you have young people who are exactly like you said, they're upset, they want their freedoms back, they want to be able to live life like people used to, and then you have the young people who are on their moral pedestal, who are on their high horse and say, listen, you have these other young people going up to these rallies, they're evil people, we need to find a way to shut them down. And so you have a pretty stark dichotomy there of the two sides, and I think that the people who are on our side are the ones who love freedom and the ones I really respect.
It's interesting you say that about the dichotomy of the younger people, because that's exactly what you're seeing on the national stage in the political realm. Yeah. It's very heated and it's very divisive. There aren't too many people out there who are on the fence about coronavirus mandates to this day.
Yeah, most people aren't on the fence because it's not, again, about the science or about helping people. It's about choosing a side for how people will view you. And that's also true for the conservative side. You know, there were conservatives who were trying to get brownie points for maybe their 2024 run. I won't name any names, but some conservative governors who were trying to do that. And other people, you could kind of see right through them. You could see through them on the left and you could see through them on the right. There were very few people who I felt really had any sort of realistic convictions, kind of like a Ron DeSantis, that type of name, who actually believed in the things that they were doing. I think that's a pretty rare trait to have in politics, and so I think that's kind of why the moderate is dying out in this country, because it's all just in many ways, to the elites of this country, it's a game. It's a game to these people that they're playing, and they play with our lives. They play with our futures and our livelihood.
And our freedoms. The fate of America rests on the right side of this, winning the battle. One of the things that concerns me, in Virginia, where I live, I see far too many young people still wearing face masks, even as they drive down the road in cars by themselves. And I see that as a sign of this growing willingness of the next generation of leaders in America to see government as the be-all and end-all of individual decisions.
Yeah, they want the government to decide these things for them. They don't want to have to decide them for themselves. It's much easier for them to not have to think and to just have people come in and say, listen, you wear a mask, maybe now with monkeypox, you wear gloves everywhere you go, whatever it might be. They don't have to think, and they can be part of a group that is supposedly morally correct. They're going to choose that 9 times out of 10 because it's the easy thing to do. It's hard to be the person to say, I'm going to take the mask off when everyone else around me is doing it, or I'm going to not lock down or social distance when everyone else is doing it, even though none of the stuff is backed up by science. I mean, it's hard to be that type of person, especially young people being so impressionable as well as very weak. I think we have the weakest young people in America that we've ever really had in this country, and they're just willing to go along with the herd and not really think for themselves.
So now that automatically brings up the next question. So how do you fight that? How do you counter that?
Well, I think a lot of it goes two ways. You know, the way that I talk about it is compassion in the micro and then passion in the macro. So on a micro level, when you're talking to individuals, you want to do your best to educate them. You want to do your best to talk to them and have good conversations where you can actually change minds. You're not set out on, you know, maybe a social media page or at a dinner or whatever it might be to hurt these people. That should never be your intention, or to just prove that you're right. That shouldn't be your intention, because all it does is make their divide worse most of the time. And so then when it comes to passion on the macro, that means when you're talking about these things on a larger scale and talking about the things that are going wrong, you are very truthful, you are unflinching and unwavering. So in individual conversations with people, you are trying to do the best you can to change minds, compassionate, little humility. But on the macro scale, when you're talking about things to educate more people, then you are unflinching with the truth. I think that's the best way we do it.
That's sound wisdom. That seems very wise. And do you have any stories, or at least one story maybe, that you could share of somebody that you dealt with on an individual basis, or maybe in a small group, and after you engaged in a discussion, they came up to you and actually told you that you changed their minds?
Yeah, I've had plenty of these experiences, which is really awesome to see. You know, for me, going out on the street and talking to people for all these years, you will have lots of these experiences when you practice and keep asking questions to people. I had one a little while ago where, about 3 years ago, I had gone and done this video asking people about who the vice president was. This was when Trump was in office, and people couldn't say Mike Pence, right? I was out on Hollywood Boulevard. months ago, I had my book tour, and I was at this spot in Cal State Fullerton, and this guy came up to me and he said, "Will, do you remember me?" I said, "Not really. What's up, man? Where do I know you from?" He's like, "You interviewed me on the streets about 3 years ago asking me this question. And now, after that, I felt so dumb after not knowing. I started looking into all these things, looking into PragerU, who you work for, and who you are, and I became a massive fan and started becoming this conservative person, researching and educating, and now I'm going out and educating my friends on these types of issues."
Wow.
It's like those. That's why I do what I do. That's really the reason. You know, because it's not everyone can help everyone, but everyone can help someone. You can always go out and talk to at least one person to try and change what they're doing.
Have you had any experiences like that, changing hearts and minds of young people on, say, wearing face masks or on the possible dangers of vaccine mandates in terms of robbing Americans of their own decision-making abilities?
Oh, definitely, yeah. I did a video at University of Texas Denton, which is right outside, I think that's what it's called, UNT Denton, and it's right outside of Dallas. If you know anything about Dallas, it's basically Los Angeles, but flat. And it was incredible to see how shallow these people's, I guess you could say, opinions, or what they would say is quote-unquote facts, are, that you can just have the tiniest bit of scrutiny against the things that they say, and you can unravel everything that they believe. It's quite easy when you get down to it. And so I was talking to these kids about vaccine mandates. Should their campus have a vaccine mandate for attending? And many of them said, yes, we should. We should make sure that everyone is keeping everyone else safe. And then you get into the numbers on COVID. You get into the vaccine efficacy. And you do all these different things. And you find that, listen, this is about freedom. This is about things that aren't actually really protecting people in that much of a degree, especially young people. And so I was able to change a lot of minds in that video. And again, it's very cool. You can only hope that those people who I change their minds actually go out and try and change other people's minds too.
It seems to me that it's not just young people that have such shallow understanding of major issues that impact their individual freedoms. Because if you look at national polling, for instance, if you go beyond the headlines and actually read the polls and the questions and the order and the rhetoric they use, they'll ask questions like, do you favor open space, right? And 90% of people will say yes, but then when it gets down to the funding and the tax dollars that have to be raised in order to achieve their open space, that's where it starts to crumble a bit.
Yeah, I mean, people are always willing to say that they want something if it's going to be spending someone else's money and maybe not their own. But now I think that the left has gone so far left that they are fine with spending their own money for these leftist projects because they believe in defeating the conservative side so much, because they think that we are so evil. We've been vilified to an extent that I don't think this country has ever really experienced before, maybe going back to the Civil War, potentially, the right versus, or the South versus the North. But it seems like conservatives have been vilified so bad in this country that people are willing to give up really anything to make sure that our side is defeated. And that's a scary thought for people who are conservative in this country. But the only reason why it gets to that point is because conservatives let people talk about us like that. Instead of fighting back and speaking the truth and going out and being brave about it, we say, okay, we'll give you an inch, and every time they take a mile continuously. So we have to be braver in all these types of situations.
And sometimes, though, when conservatives do speak out boldly and bravely, they get booted and they get stifled. And you have fights such as the kind we're seeing now with Elon Musk over Twitter.
Yeah, but that's a consequence of being a truth teller. You can't expect that you're going to speak truth in a world full of lies and think that that's going to be an easy feat. People who expect that are really naive if they think that, we should all just be able to have our own opinions and that's how life's supposed to be, and just a safe place where we can all talk and just that's all that it's going to be. But you are putting that up against an ideology, leftism, which is destructive in nature. It is revolutionary in nature. I mean, it goes back to Marx, Marcuse, the Frankfurt School, all of these types, Saul Alinsky, all of these books and all of these thinkers. It's all about revolution. It's all about destruction of the norms. And so if you are pitted against an ideology like that, then you have to be ready for them to try to destroy you. That is what is going to happen. So either you speak truth and you speak it boldly, or you cower in fear to what these people are going to do to you.
Now, from my view, looking at national reports and so forth, it just looks pretty dim in terms of this coming generation, the younger generations, and their viewpoints on First Amendment freedom of speech rights. What do you see? What do you see on the scale that you deal with? Because you go to college campuses and you speak to young people about free speech and so forth. Is it more optimistic?
I'm a little bit torn there, because they just had some polling come out about Joe Biden for young people. I think it was under the age of 35, I believe. Anyway, he only had like a 38% approval rating. So that shows that at least there's some young people who are not happy with this current president, but that's hard to know if they're also disillusioned with the social justice message that the left is pushing aside from Joe Biden. So it's hard to know on that front when it comes to national politics. But I think in terms of young people, I think that I talk to a lot of young men, right? I talk to a lot of young men, whether it's my friends or on campus, all sorts of places, or people I just meet. And so many young men say, I wish that I could have served in World War II or served in World War I. They look back at these times with a romantic feeling. And I say this because I think that there is a big problem with young people, especially young men in this country, that they feel like they have no great purpose. They go to college like everyone else. They lose God like everyone else. They go move to some urban city devoid of any sort of beautiful architecture or culture, and their soul dies, essentially. And so I think that people are looking for some sort of meaning. And so until people stop having these, especially young people, have these easy, squishy lives where nothing challenges them and it's all just monotonous, I fear for the worst, because a population like that are essentially slaves to the oligarchy that's in control of us.
So just last question to discuss here, then. How much do you see what you just described, how much do you see that being attributed to the growing secularism in America and simultaneously the opportunity for Christians in America or evangelicals to move in order to reel back big government?
Oh, I mean, it's the biggest issue. Secularism is the biggest issue in America, really. I mean, you bring back godly values, you bring back Scripture. I mean, people will have better lives. It doesn't mean that your life's going to be easier. I'm not going to say that, anyone who believes in Jesus or gives their life for him is going to have a better life, or an easier life, but your life will be better. I think it's incredibly important. These are the values that Western culture and tradition was founded on, all the way back in Europe. I mean, from Charlemagne up until now, right? This is what the West has been all about. And so if we can have a return to those types of values, a return to that type of culture, I think that things can get better. I think it's the most important thing that we focus on as a culture, and a lot of these problems happen in the pulpit, because you have these pastors and these priests who give these feel-good messages of Christ and these feel-good messages of religion, and all you're doing is fooling people into believing, again, that your life is supposed to be easy, and that all of these things are supposed to make you feel good. Your life is not just for you to feel good. This isn't a utopia. You have to go through struggles and heartache, and that comes with religion. That comes with your politics. That comes with speaking truth. And until we can get back to that, then we will continue to suffer as a nation.
And the greater the struggle, really, the greater reward, right? That's where self-esteem should come from. I want to thank you for saying that. That's good truth for everybody to hear. And thank you for the work that you do on behalf of America, especially saving the youth from socialism. I appreciate you being here, Will.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here always.
Give me one generation of youth, just one generation of youth, and I'll transform the whole world. Who said that? Vladimir Lenin, one of the Democrat Party's leading heroes, no doubt. Thank you for listening. If you like Bold and Blunt, don't forget you can get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, the platform for faith-based podcasts, or at Washington Times, or of course at Spotify, Apple, all the normal podcast places. And one other quick note, check out Lockdown, the Socialist Plan to Take Away Your Freedom, my latest book, available at Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Amazon. It gives you what the title suggests, the socialist plan to steal American liberties using the coronavirus and fear as justification. Thank you for listening. Tune in next time. And don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold.